I just read this wonderful dissertation from MyCat, and it's 8 books. My wife said to me, "That's a dissertation, all those books?" And I said, "Yeah, but now I'm going to evaluate this dissertation positively because the person is pushing at me from the left. She's pushing at me on my own issue, the format. She's pushing at me on my own issues around presentation. But when you do 8, does it have to be 8? And who's going to read it? And it's not like we're talking about Edna O'Brien or James. I mean, it's not that. Anyway. But there's a reason for those 8 books. So this issue of presentation is Bernie would say, not the other guy from New York. Bernie would say it's huge. To me, it is the issue. I've moved beyond justification and credibility, and we want to stay trapped in that. I can't stay there. The practical problem I'm dealing with all the time, and the question I'm asking myself is format, is presentation. Arguably, the strict APA IMRAD format is anti-artistic. However, it is simple and clear. It is simple and clear. And it does allow flexibility. That introduction, and do your literature. In artist-based research, I said, do the literature at the end, and not bias yourself so much. But okay, every place has a cookie-cutter format. But if you ask me, are there things you like about it practically? Does it help your students practically? I'd say yes. So, but I would argue not to make it an absolute. You follow what I mean? MyCat, they don't make it. I would argue not to make IMRAD, which is a scientific format, which many scientists challenge because of its stereotypic cookie cutter. And more than anything else, sometimes I don't have a choice, and I have I think I've seen IMRAD do positive work with doctoral dissertations. I see it doing no good work with journalism. None. Killing. They don't look like the work. They're lifeless tables and graphs, and they don't look like it. You know what I'm talking about, IMRAD? Introduction, the 5 chapters. So what does it look like? I mean, there was a stage in the 70s, and when I was a dean, where you'd see every now and then, you'd see a master's thesis with feathers sticking out of it. And I'm not conservative on this issue. That's why the students push at me. So, in terms of form and format, as an experienced author, you've written too much. He's had some success in publishing. In terms of getting worldwide audience. I've learned that you have to say it clearly, succinctly. You have to think about your readers. You must. You must think about your audience. So it's a question of how to best get to them. The gazillion pages, and it's not going to work, I don't think. Arguably. Although I'm always open to being challenged from the left. This woman, Melinda Lack, she's a prominent dance movement person, said, "Shaun, but I'm doing it all about movement. Why do I have to write about it?" You have to write about it. You can move it, but you've got to make some kind of a summary statement because it's just an academic exercise. You see what I mean? Is it an example of that push? And of course, what I want people to write about it, I want them to write tersely about it. One of the diseases I feel in the field today is called hyperciting. Where you don't use your own words. You're always citing everybody else. My oldest daughter taught for years in the Harvard writing program, and their guide to psychological writing is no quotes. No quotes. Too much quoting, too much citing. If you can't put it in your own words, and you don't understand it. But I'm a little lenient on quoting in terms of if I've used your word, for example, I need to get, if I use Gadamer's word convincing from Truth and Method, I have to put that word in quotes. Do you follow what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a key, that word is key to his thought. So I have to put that word in quotes with a citation to Truth and Method so people will go and look at it. If I have to talk about no law-like generalizations, I have to put that in quotes because it's pretty, but not the whole page, and cite McIntyre. But the problem in the work today, I think, is not only excess writing and excess information, as you might say. I don't call hard data, but as we say, too much data, rather than volumes of material that you then synthesize and reflect upon for essential principles. So there are all kinds of challenges and problems. Oh, the other big issue in our case research, and I've written about quality a lot in my new book, Imagination in Action, in 2009. There's a whole chapter on quality, and the quality matters. Quality is important. I feel that every gesture that we make has an inherent desire within itself, as I do personify them, to execute itself as completely as possible. And we have all kinds of resistance getting in the way. So quality is inherent to the gesture, to the act. Quality is part of nature. It is not this processed products, just forget about quality. But we've got to revision quality. We've got to rethink it and look at it as infinitely variable. It's infinitely personal. Bernard of Clairvaux, with this wonderful sister at Ursuline College, a colleague of mine, used to quote all the time, said that the definition of beauty is what's uniquely you. It cannot be judged by me. You follow what I mean? By my standard. It can be critically compared, but what's uniquely you is that's like every leaf is different in nature. Do you follow what I mean? So quality is important. So you want to be as authentically you as possible. You want that gesture, that sound to be. If it's a bereaving sound, you want it to be as bereaved as you possibly can, or as ecstatic as you possibly can. So quality is important. And then it raises the big issue about who can do art-based research. I am an absolute egalitarian. I would say anything. But there are things that I can't do on a keyboard. Do you follow what I mean? Yeah. So there are issues. I am an absolute egalitarian, but I would say that there are issues. And there are going to be issues of who chooses to do it. Do you follow what I mean? And generally, someone with a certain proficiency is more apt to choose, or a certain history. And that proficiency has something to do with the discourse that ensues, both as an asset and as a bias. Norman Cantor, the great dance movement therapist, was the first person I hired from my parents' age when I started the program at Lesley. He used to say how she had such trouble working with trained dancers. And then she wanted to work with ordinary people, like Rudy Perez, walking, Thich Nhat Hanh, pieces in every step. The trained dancer had such a trouble getting to authentic movement rather than all of his, or his, You follow what I'm talking about? So quality, it swings both ways. I think yeah, it's almost time anyway. I think let me just look at it. My cat, Melbourne Institute for Expressive Arts Therapy. I was delighted to be with them not too long ago. I gave a public lecture that they sponsored together with La Trobe University outside of Melbourne, which that area is an epicenter. And it's an epicenter because I think it comes from one person, a group of people. And when I was giving the talk there, they had a group of painters up on the stage painting in response. It's fascinating. You follow? For example, one of the things I do most in my studios is that what I've learned is that we tend to talk. Talking is important, but we tend to talk too much. So I've learned that movement interpretation of a painting comes from the heart. It's embodied. As a witness of someone moving in response to their image, I get closer to it. I really, as a painter, I think I understand it better. I feel it more. They say the same thing. They say it's much more intimate. And they're always surprised at the outcome because it can never be planned in advance. That's art-based research. That is the essential statement. My work with movement interpretation has been going on for years and years and years. You know, and sometimes when we were doing at the University of Sydney, everyone was out on the lawn, you know, painting their pictures, and everyone was walking by. It became a big happening, and people said, why can't we do this in museums? You know, other ways of getting close to images, but of course we talk about images. You see what I mean? I'm not trying to create some sort of dichotomy, but what I learned with art is medicine with imaginal dialogue, sometimes when we speak as them, not to them, sometimes when we get out of our ego voice, when we get into, as Jung did this over 100 years ago, back of imagination, when we let the image speak for itself, when we let the black speak for itself, we go deeper. Therefore, I am totally committed to issues of practice as the fundamental basis of research, rather than esoteric. Because there are outcomes. As a changed person, there are improvements. And it keeps the work essential to itself. And we have to think of ways then, of when we do that, how do we present it in ways that are compelling and convincing, and they're going to influence others. Of course we want to influence others. Of course. But I don't think it's with graphs. And you follow what I mean? And you know, sometimes you have to have the ability to say, no, this is not, you cannot put this into that framework. That framework does not hold this as much as you might like it. Because the so-called proof, in my opinion, is totally false. And what I've learned as an artist, and also someone studying the history of art, and someone who's even involved in leadership of complex organizations, the most difficult problems are complex. They're complex. My book, Trust the Process, An Artist's Guide to Letting Go, maybe some of you know it's best-selling book, Trust the Process, it was used for the Center of Leadership in DC. Because they say complex problems, like they use it to training young politicians in the Northern Ireland peace process, because complex problems require you to enter a process. And as Kafka said, commit yourself to it completely. And if you don't commit yourself, you are expressing mistrust. You have to enter a process, relaxing all your biases, with complete openness of love in the heart, and listen to the other. Emmanuel Levinas. I will never know the other, I'll never reduce the other to my own thoughts, but I can listen to the other. We can have a conversation together. Now this brings us to my last point. A fellow named Warren Lett started, he's an Australian who got his doctorate at Berkeley, went back to Australia. Very influenced. And his whole notion of training therapists and counselors, the founder of Mike that where he started with integrated is all of the arts are companions, and he has a method where the therapist is always viewed as a companion. Always, and it's a very Rogerian, notion that I agree with. Of course, you're a professional and everything else. But what's happened at MyCat is that whole companion notion has spilled over into their research. And I'm really thinking a lot about it, and I'm going to write about it. And I love Warren. He's been close with late 80s, I've got to write about him. But this whole companion notion, it's like what they know, the phenomenologists are careful of labels, talk about intersection. I don't use the term as much as I studied with Quentin Lauer in college. But reality is reciprocal. I like that term better. It's mutual. Reality, I like simple terms. Reality is mutual. It's not me alone. And so at MyCat, they always work together with one person. And it gets tricky. It gets murky. Reality gets messy. But how can we extract it? I sound like one of these oil extractors. How can we try to say it in the most convincing way possible? All right, enough. We have time for questions.
Someone on the case. I want to drink water out of that.
Please say your name and nice and loud.
Okay, my name is Amy Chang, I'm a painter. I understood everything you said. I agree with everything you said. But what does it look like? I mean, can you show us your...
Well, go look at... I intentionally didn't do that. I was going to intentionally bring one of the great MyCat theses, Raylene's last name, and I was going to pass it around. And I intentionally didn't do it because it's infinitely variable. It is infinitely variable. Now, where I am at Lesley, we have to use APA, right? I'll push against that. But, so it's going to look like that in RAD format. But at MyCat, it doesn't. It doesn't. In my opinion, ideally, it should reflect the infinite variability of work. Is that clear? So, an art-based research study usually has a lot of images. In this day and age, the digital version can have a lot of links to the video and other kinds of things, or it can put the video right in it. If you want to look at something I did, look at Art is Medicine. You just Google it right away; it'll come up. So it's a situation where I don't want to present that because then it gets too much about that, too much about me. I want it to be about you. So, but there's an example of something I did. And I mean, I don't know, 50 paintings, something paintings, and I demonstrated myself, and experimented myself with the process of imaginal dialogue. And I have to say, that book, even in the most conservative art therapy programs, they read it because they realize there are other voices. So, infinitely variable. Yeah, others, please. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Lucy Barbiera. I teach expressive arts in education and human services here for the last 20 years. And I did an arts-based research for my dissertation. It was an ethnographic, autoethnographic arts-based research. And it was very much many images. My people I was working with, their imagery, their art, their poetry, their drama, their improvisation was all part of the research. Some were video clips, some were audio clips, and a lot were just digital.
What about your own?
Excuse me?
Did you put your own art in too?
Yes, it was autoethnographic and ethnographic. So I was studying the culture of a classroom, a teacher education classroom, social justice teacher education classroom, and the impact art making had on the teacher education for social justice.
I'm a great admirer of Clifford Geertz, who's done so
Yes.
much to bring in. A great admirer of this.
Absolutely.
But I have problems with this term autoethnography.
Yeah, well, it's just a fancy
why can't
way.
we just call it autobiography?
Yeah, it's just a fancy
you know
way.
What I mean?
Right, but if you think about it, if you talk about autoethnography and you think about, well, if ethnography is study of culture, autoethnography is study of the culture of the self. So I was studying the culture of
I get you. I'm just
self. Yeah.
This
yeah.
is what I do with my students around the.
I had a question.
Can you get your own word? You know.
I had a question.
But Geertz is a very, very, very important figure in opening up the landscape of research. And qualitative research includes autoethnography, ethnographical research, and all the different, I call it the 1,001 different varieties. But the problem I have with those is that many schools require that you use one of them. I have a problem with that.
Right.
And I have a problem with the labeling. And St. Stephen's College, where I review theses in Canada and Edmonton. And then the student did this brilliant thing, but she had to call it one of those things, and
Yeah.
it didn't need to be called
Yeah,
it. But God bless you
sure.
in terms of what you're doing.
But I had
Yeah,
a
go
question,
ahead.
Shaun, if I can quickly just ask
Yeah.
one question. You said you don't call art data,
Right.
and I call art data because I see art as factual, in the moment facts. If you think about data as statistic, yeah, it's not a statistic, but I believe it is fact, and I believe art is the data. The dance is the data, the poetry is the data.
I don't.
If you're thinking about
For
research.
many reasons, I think it's, the language carries baggage.
Yeah,
There are many things that I call data, and I could give you 50 examples.
right.
And I arguably include interviews. Do you know what I mean? And that even though as personal as they are. But I'm sorry, for me, art is a sacred thing.
Okay, I get it.
I do not look at my paintings as data. I look at them as them, and we enter into a relationship. I look at them as others, and that is one of the many reasons why I don't use that term
But if
data to describe art. However, many of the people that I admire most, Alfred North Whitehead from Process and Reality, and I mean, he kind of got it in terms of what reality is, this flux of actual events, and he uses the term datum and things like that. As
Well-
others, go ahead, you want to follow up?
I just want to say that datum, Latin, something given. If we look at datum, the actual translation in Latin is something given. So if we take away the kind of
I'm glad that you
quantitative
were perceiving
connotation.
the work in that context, and I couldn't agree more
Okay,
with where you're coming from.
Okay.
I prefer not to use that.
okay, all right,
I just talk about it as art. You know,
Okay.
the art. Yeah.
great.
Do you follow what I mean? don't want to
I
reduce
do.
it. Yeah.
I do.
Someone? There are? Yeah, please.
So one of the things that our graduate students ask a lot when we start talking about arts-based research is how it's evaluated. How do you evaluate a good piece of arts-based research? I'm curious how you respond to that.
What's your name? Beth. Great question. And it is my friend Ross Pryor, who did the conference at Wolverhampton, and who's the editor of the Journal of Planners and Health, is doing a new book where that's going to be a major focal. How do we evaluate it? For me, it's very simple. We evaluate it the way we evaluate life. We evaluate it the way we evaluate art. We evaluate it, Hans Georg Gadamer, I write a lot about this. What is convincing? What is convincing? We evaluate it in terms of its potential to change the field, to move the field in a different mode. Henry Geldzinger, with that controversial New York painting and sculpture show in 1970, talked about deflectors, those who changed the course of history. And I can give you all, and so it's hard to evaluate it close up in terms of that, but I can evaluate it now from a distance. Those works that have changed the world, that have changed practice, and that actually can be quantified somewhat in terms of those pieces that have caught the imagination of the public, those acts, as McIntyre said, those unpredicted acts that change the world. So evaluation is critical, but we have to put it into the context of reality. We cannot evaluate art from the perspective of natural science. So when evaluating art, we have to deal with the ambiguities, we have to deal with the messiness, and I've got 1,000 other reasons in terms of good writing, well written. Did you follow what I mean? Terse, cogent arguments, authenticity, quality in terms of the art thing is always talked about as authenticity. So trustworthiness in social science. So does that help? You were having quickly.
Yeah. We do say that in terms of evaluation, it has to do with the embedding of the evaluation within the community that's creating the standards of evaluation and the traditions of that community. For instance, you're pointing to exemplary performances, okay? Things that have changed the world, but in the sense, which world? Whose world?
Well, now we're getting into that whole, I've always talked about the problems with ruling paradigms, but I've had a real problem. I'm not a great fan of what's happened in our so-called postmodern era in terms of losing touch with what I would call those essential qualities of human experience, those things that make us human, that we share with all human beings. And I think that those things exist. And I think that compelling work can, of course, it will be judged and evaluated and assessed within disciplines. But in my opinion, those things that matter most transcend disciplines. They reach to the general public and they change the world. And I could give you many examples, Mr. Collion. Give you an example of a piece. That red book. That's good. I said that red book is probably the best piece of art-based inquiry that I've ever seen. That is good. That has changed me. It changed the world. There are so many examples we can go from the arts that change the world. And another thing I say to my students, write it in a way that it is not constrained by the guildmeisters. Write it in a way that an average intelligent person can understand it. Because I really believe in transdisciplinary, transcultural thinking in terms of course it's going to be assessed and evaluated within your discipline. But your discipline can also be an oppressor. It has its agendas. I often call my beloved art therapy community as a syndicate. It's got a big multi-million-dollar educational syndicate driving, which is good and bad. Do you follow what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, what's your name? You didn't give your name.
My name is Frank Boyer.
Frank, yeah, so we can talk more about that. Yes, within the disciplines, but thanks for saying that. Try to get outside of it too. Okay, bye. Thank you very much.